This is Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. Inspiring and providing real insight to our listeners with every story. Exploring deep stories behind every guest. Please welcome your host, Beau Tiffany.
Welcome back to another episode of Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. I'm welcoming back Connor Quinn to kind of dive into the history of voice acting. We've gotten together a few different times, and this is our first video episode together. Connor likes to keep his anonymity because he's in voice acting. He plays a variety of characters, and he likes that anonymity so that he's not stereotyped, if that's a good way to put it, Connor.
It sure is. Yeah. It's just allows me to be flexible with the roles that they cast me for. A lot of times if they were to see me, they would say he's too young to play the elderly person or too old to play the younger guy. So it helps me be flexible with the roles that they can possibly cast me for.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've talked over the months, we keep diving into some of the early roots of voice acting and how it's evolved from radio theater and those early roots, and often how those early voice actors didn't really get the limelight or the recognition that they deserved, in my opinion. And so we came up with this podcast today to dive into the roots of voice acting and pay a little homage to our forefathers. And in doing so, bring to light some of my favorite memories of things that voice actors created the characters of. Why don't we get you started on this? Why don't you start with discussing the importance of voice acting and why it deserves more recognition?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, the roots of even television, and not necessarily film, but definitely television and just the advancement of the art. It all started in radio theater, which of course came from vaudeville and stage acting before that. But in radio theater specifically, we had a lot of celebrities that people really didn't see. There was no internet, of course, so they didn't widely circulate the pictures of the actors then. So they were anonymous for the most part, other than their voice. The audience kind of made up their own minds as to what their favorite star, their favorite radio actor or actress looked like. And that just continued when I was younger, you were younger, and into this newer generation of animation. A lot of those actors from old radio were brought into the 60s and then, of course, 70s when I got it as voice actors for animation. And so you and I, we both grew up with some of these legendary voice actors. And I always felt that it was just, I don't know. I know that they embraced being anonymous just like I do. A lot of them didn't want the spotlight necessarily, but that doesn't mean that I think that they should have gotten more recognition for their art form, because it is a true art form, and it gets largely ignored, and we just move on to other things. And we often forget there was someone who did Mickey Mouse. There's someone that does Donald Duck. There's someone that does Bugs Bunny. Those are real people. Who are they?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, just to highlight some of these key figures in radio theater, we had Orson Welles, Agnes Moorehead, William Conrad. Let's talk about their impact, because they started this.
They really did. Orson Welles, of course, went on to do other things, his directing, and then, of course, his acting. And he just became a very notable figure, entertainment, an icon to this day. But like you mentioned, he started off as a young individual in radio. And of course, his big claim to fame back then was the War of the Worlds broadcast, which inadvertently scared a lot of people back in the day that tuned in late to the show and thought that the United States was under attack by Martians or aliens. And Orson hadn't intended on that. It was just a regular broadcast of the Mercury Theater, which was what it was called. And it had unintended consequences. But anyway, it launched his career, or launched him more on a platform. And
we're talking a young Orson. It's not
very young.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I don't know his age offhand, but
I think he was in his late teens.
Yeah, I think so. Just a kid with a big voice, big, deep voice. And of course, that would carry him all throughout his life. He became that icon because of that trademark enunciation and word, just everything that we attribute to Orson Welles is similar to how we do Morgan Freeman today. If you hear Morgan or see Morgan Freeman's name, he's going to have a large monologue in the movie so he can show off, do that flex of that great Morgan Freeman voice. And you mentioned Agnes Moorehead. She went on to do a lot of television and stuff as a character actress. And Bill Conrad, he was the original Matt Dillon for radio's Gunsmoke. And the younger generation, at least our generation, will recognize him. He was the narrator for a lot of the Rocky and Bullwinkle episodes, which, again, he was just classified for that voice that he had. And there's so many just unsung heroes that I look up to from that radio era.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, my first job was for Disney. We were doing what were called storyteller records and cassettes. So they were in the process of transferring a lot of their old film, their animation films, and making them into like storybooks for children, storyteller records and cassettes. And a lot of those cast members, unfortunately, had passed away. But for the one that they were doing with me, it was a young Winnie the Pooh, or actually a young Christopher Robin, who I was the voice of. But the cast was pretty much in part the whole cast who had originally been with Winnie the Pooh. And most of them were radio actors in turn. We had Sterling Holloway, who was the voice of Winnie the Pooh. And we had Junius Matthews, and we had Sebastian Cabot, who played Mr. French from A Family Affair, and so on and so forth. And Paul Winchell, just, an amazing early television ventriloquist and comedian who did amazing voices. He was the voice of Tigger. So it just highlights that we're surrounded by so many talent. And it even comes up to modern day when we have a few years ago when Siri first was released. Who is the voice behind Siri? So we're still impacted by voice actors, even in this day of AI and all of technology. We still have a human touch behind a lot of what we hear in a lot of our entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a on-screen actor phenomenon that occurred early on where a lot of these on-screen actors transitioned to voice acting, more notably within our generations. We're looking at Mark Hamill, famous for obviously Luke Skywalker, known for the voice of Joker in Batman, the animated series. And then there's Vin Diesel from, everybody knows who he is from Fast and Furious and a bunch of other stuff. But he's also the voice of Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy. And I would be hating myself if I didn't include Eddie Murphy. He's famous for a variety of live action roles, as well as Donkey and Shrek. But he has these on-screen actors have now become off-screen actors and dove into the world of voice acting. What's behind that phenomenon?
It's just incredible. It's like a lot of the projects that Disney has had over the years, they knew that they would have more success if they would put a celebrity with a voice. So it got really popular in the 90s, having Robin Williams for the voice of Genie for Aladdin, and James Earl Jones as Mufasa in The Lion King. And for the most part, voice actors have had just this quiet existence. But the fact of having an on-screen celebrity, so to speak, take on animation roles, that goes back a long time ago. For example, if we go back to, I think it was like 1963, 1964, we have the incredible Mr. Limpet. And that was a live action with animation with Don Knotts. Before that, we had Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews with Mary Poppins. And I guess, that would have been before, because Disney died in 66 and Mary Poppins was done before that. Oh, we had that. In the animated Jungle Book, we had several celebrities. Again, we had Sebastian Cabot, which we mentioned. We also had a legendary screen actor, George Sanders, was the voice of Shere Khan. And Louis Prima, a renowned jazz singer. And of course, you had Phil Harris as Baloo. So people have just embraced what they do know. So the very opposite of me being anonymous, you also have this dichotomy where people embrace characters and actors that they do love and seeing their animated versions in what they do, which it is a dichotomy. So it's cool. And plus it just brings to the forefront, guarantees that those things will be successful. For example, if we take like Steve Carell, the stuff that he has done for animation, playing Groot or not Groot, I'm sorry, what was his name in Despicable Me? Gru, not Gru.
Okay.
Felonious Gru. He played that character, the lovable villain. But anyway, so all the studios, of course, have latched on to that and we're going to have success because we have a known actor, but he or she is being supported by a bunch of unknown actors. And again, we just have that quiet multitude of voice actors that do their job, that are not looking for the spotlight, even though there are the Eddie Murphys and the Vin Diesels out there. And Mark Hamill, he's really different from Vin Diesel and Eddie Murphy. Mark Hamill has embraced and gone full bore into doing voiceover. He was renowned when I was a kid, of course, being Luke Skywalker, and that was the whole of his existence. And he quietly started doing this voice acting. We knew that he had fun with stuff, with appearing on the Muppets. He loved the Muppets, so he was a nerd at heart. And then his Joker, I think there's no better version of the Joker than Mark Hamill's Joker. The laugh that he does, it's just full blown. He's got into the character. And so all these actors, these known actors, have really done a job. So they are to be saluted just as well as the anonymous names of like the Mel Blanc and Dawes Butler and June Foray and all those people.
Yeah. One person we haven't mentioned who has passed now, but was one of my favorites, was Gilbert Gottfried. His character behind Diego I think to that point, some people have just a personality they bring through their vocal acting.
They do. And for example, of Gilbert Gottfried, that was a kind of his whole character. That is a character. Even the voice that he would use in interviews was a creation. And they just used that for Iago for Disney's Aladdin. I guess you can YouTube it. You can hear.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You can hear his real voice. I know Howard Stern for a while was obsessed with that, but it's just like anybody. It's like you find whatever your niche is and you embrace it and go for it. He did, you know?
Well, and another person, I think, talking about voice actors, comedians lend well for the craft, I think, for character creation. We take a look at Eddie Murphy and we take a look at Robin Williams, and both of them amazing stand-up performances, but they're able to, both of them, I believe, have records. I know obviously Eddie Murphy for sure did for his stand-up. So all you could hear is his voice and making you laugh, and those influences and nuances and the way that they storytell, I think, is amazing, especially in character. Good point to that is Donkey and Shrek.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I'd worked with Robin Williams on several projects for Disney, and what was always amazing is his script. My script had lines. Here's all the lines, but with Robin's, it was just like just small little outline of here's where we want you to go, and because I knew he would ad lib, so they had the script to appeal to his personality. Many years ago, when they were making Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I was in the studio at B&B Studios. When they were doing that, we were working on another series, and Charles Fleischer, who was also a very successful stand-up comedian, was the voice of Roger Rabbit. And I remember the way he could get into the character was he had to have a rabbit suit. He had to physically be the bunny. And so they had him in this giant adult rabbit costume, and that's how he would deliver most of his lines. I thought it was hilarious, but it helped him get into the character. And then we have the other end of it. We go back to Star Wars with James Earl Jones. So you have a very established actor from Broadway, a very distinguished actor, doing this kind of an unknown thing at the time, this kind of schlocky, in some people's opinion, poorly written space opera. So I don't know how he felt about doing it. I know that there was good things that Peter Cushing was on the project and Sir Alec Guinness. So I think that's probably why he signed on, but it was an unknown because there wasn't really, other than those guys, there really wasn't anybody in it. Harrison Ford was kind of known, but Mark Hamill was completely new to the scene. And Star Wars, of course, just changed the landscape of not only filmmaking, but nerddom and just everything in between.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting to watch interviews with James Earl Jones talking about those early days when George Lucas had brought him in to read for Darth Vader. Here we have an established actor. And again, he was not the James Earl Jones he is today, but for a certain group of people, especially people who are very familiar with Broadway and some early film, they were very familiar with James Earl Jones. So it's just amazing how many known actors have really embraced voice acting in particular.
Yeah, for sure. Let's transition to modern media. Taking a look at television and video games, can we discuss the transition from transitional or traditional animation to TV shows and video games?
Yeah, I think that it was. We had one of the early successes of a cartoon in prime time was the Flintstones. Before then, it was just something for children. And you had Warner Brothers, which were before they were really successful on television, they were used in theaters as shorts. And although they were appealing to children, had the fortune of working with Chuck Jones right before he had passed away when I was in college. And he shared some stories about those early days that he said that the interesting thing is that those scripts were written for adults, not for children. They didn't have children in mind. So, as a kid, a lot of that humor and impersonations went right over my head, but it was still funny to me as a kid. Right. And I think that the advertisers, they knew that the money is on kids, and the parents of those kids who are going to be buying the stuff. So I think that was a push for animation to go a little more mainstream. And then in the 90s, it really became mainstream. And we had Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, where it was okay for adults to watch cartoons and animation. And as those of us that were young, as we grew into adulthood, we still carried our childhood with us. And I think that was in those days of the birth of nerddom, where it was okay to embrace I always pictured myself being on the island of misfit toys, being a nerd and not really fitting in. We're now in an age where it's perfectly fine to be that way. And for the most part, nerds are running the world, which is great. They are running the world.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. That's great insight right there. Voice actors turn on screen actors. Is there anybody that's switched over? I know Seth MacFarlane started out as a creator and voice actor for Family Guy and later starred in live action roles. I don't know if any of them have been all that great. There's that space one that he's currently in that makes me shake my head sometimes. It's a parody of Star Trek.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. We have a lot of, for example, I don't know how much television or film work he had done, but you take someone like Hank Azaria from The Simpsons, who plays Moe, and those. He's mainly been known for doing The Simpsons, but he evolved and started doing a lot of film stuff as well. He was on The Birdcage, and you have the same with Dan Castellaneta. He's done film, and even Harry Shearer, but Harry Shearer was known anyway. But there's been a few people that have, like you said, broken that mold where they came out and went to television. But I think for the most part, it's the opposite is true. The river flows not always just one way, but for the most part, it does. It's like when they finally arrived doing voiceover, they found nirvana. And so a lot of them are there to stay because it's not really based on physical looks. So you don't have to wear your makeup a certain way and all the perks that go with it. For example, you have Julie Kavner from The Simpsons. She's been on several films and she's gone back and done films. I can't think of some small parts that she's done after The Simpsons. But then you take like Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bard. She really has not done film. She just stays in her lane. And through social media, I think people know her. They see her TikToks or whatever. They might know what she looks like and that sort of thing. But she's just really embraced being a voice actor. And like me, is comfortable doing that. I came from doing television and some film. And I found my tribe when I got to voiceover. I think I'm here. I'll plant the flag and I'm here to stay.
Are there particular skills that transfer between voice and on-screen acting?
Yeah, I think that being an on-camera actor, it really helps in certain ways because the nuances that a person learns for acting, of any type of acting, whether it be stage or voiceover or for camera, it does translate if they are coming from camera, because a lot of the theater people learn the basics of acting, and a lot of the basics of acting is taught to you if you're going to be a on-camera actor.
Right.
However, there's a lot of voice work, a lot of voice people that get into voice work because of maybe a unique sound or whatever. They don't really have that basis in acting. And I think for the most part, those people are lucky. But to be successful, I always say the foundation of voiceover acting needs to be acting. You have to have that ground level poured in acting and truly understand acting for you to be successful, I feel. You might have a short career without acting, but I just can't see you getting a whole bunch of auditions repeatedly without that ability to act. And especially nowadays with AI, I was going to say on the horizon, it's not even on the horizon, it's here. With having AI present, that's a game changer. That's having more than one person as your competition reading those scripts against you. And so now it's more important than ever to learn those basics, to have those basics of acting down so that you can be even more human and share your experiences and bring those out in your acting, your voice acting. And that could be, you're doing a Crest commercial. You still need voice acting. Let's say you don't use Crest, but you better convince the audience that you love Crest. Or maybe you are doing an anime or something like that. Obviously you would need acting. But so no matter what you do in voiceover, unless it's just what they call IVR or on hold type of thing, really, where it's just real simple, you really do need acting to know. Even then, you really need acting. How do I break up the script? How do I communicate to the person on hold about this dentist office? You have to know how to break up the script. And that's not to say some people learn from the school of hard knocks, but it sure makes things easier if you have a coach, if you have someone that kind of guides you through the process of not only getting the skills down for acting, but also other things like, how do I get work? When I get work, how do I retain that client and that type of thing? Those are management, time management. Those are important. But going back to what you were saying, are they transferable? Yes, especially for an on-camera. They really have that work down and understanding of acting. It's also the negative thing is a lot of times is those actors are so used to using their body language, their facial expressions, and those sort of things to communicate in a message. And that's not necessarily available in a lot of things that you're going to do a voiceover for, unless it's a motion capture. And even then, that's rudimentary and uses more physical rather than facial recognition, but it can. If they're just doing just plain audio, using your face and all that stuff, that goes out the window. You don't have that. You have to learn to communicate with a voice.
Iconic voices and characters. Let's circle this back a little bit around and we'll talk about the iconic voices and characters that you grew up with. Let's discuss some of the most iconic voices in recent history and also include those provided by on-screen actors. Just following the outline.
Yeah, my very first job, of course, like as I mentioned, was working with Winnie the Pooh, Sterling Holloway, who had worked theater, vaudeville, you name it. Sterling Holloway was one of those early guys, handpicked to do some of the iconic roles, including Winnie the Pooh by Walt Disney himself, and even his on-screen presence. It's been rumored that they used characteristics as the framework for the character Dopey of the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I'm not sure that's true, but so we have those iconic Disney voices that just are legendary, and mentioning all the way up through the ages with Robin Williams, and then you have Jonathan Freeman, the voice of Jafar. He still is a huge Broadway actor in his own right. So a lot of people may have not been familiar with him before Aladdin, but him doing Jafar, they definitely got to know who he is. And Absolutely. Then you have the Broadway set that knew who he was all along. So that, going back to those iconic voices that I was surrounded by as a child, was my mentor, Dawes Butler, he did so many of the Hanna-Barbera voices, Elroy Jetson, Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Snagglepuss, just hundreds of characters. and Yogi Bear, and I just you can't shut the flow off. There's just so many of them. So working with him, and he had worked vaudeville, and he had done early television stuff, but he found his niche doing cartoons and commercials. He was also the voice of Cap'n Crunch from all the way up until the 80s. When he passed away, he was still the voice of Cap'n Crunch. So he'd done it for many years.
Right.
And then on the Warner Brothers side, you have the equivalent of Dawes Butler. On the Warner Brothers side, it was Mel Blanc, who did the iconic, who gave us Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Sylvester and he did Tweety, and it just 100 ranges. I saw an interview, I think, where David Letterman was interviewing him, and he asked him, how many voices do you do? And he said when he was in the hospital, he'd had a horrible car accident. So there was nothing to do except for he would count how many voices he did. He started keeping track. And I think he said that he had lost track at 1,500, I think, something like that, which just blows my mind. That's 1,500 voices. I thought I was doing great. I'm in the 90s with the voices that I count, but I can't imagine doing the 1,500. That's just absolutely incredible for female actors who I look up to. But for females who needed a role model, you have June Foray, who gave us so many, like Rocky the Flying Squirrel and Witch Hazel, and she was Granny with the Don't Tweety, and it's just so many amazing characters. She did the Grandma Gummy Bear and Gummy Bears and Grammy Gummy. Just so many wonderful voices.
Yeah.
And in the world of advertising mascots, Paul Frees, just by himself, was incredible. He was the voice of Toucan Sam. He's also the voice of the Haunted Mansion, still is. He was the voice of Boris Badenoff from Rocky and Bullwinkle, and he was the voice of the Pillsbury Doughboy. With just him, you have a high range of characters just with him.
Yeah. Were they more on the anonymous side, or were they key to public?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mel, of course, Mel was a very, very popular character actor in the 30s and 40s. He made appearances on radio, doing a multitude of characters for a million old radio programs, including Jack Benny. And they would use him in one scene. He's the policeman. In the next scene, he's going to be the voice of their parrot. Jack Benny had this old Maxwell car that would sputter and spitter. It was Mel Blanc that did the sound effects for that car. And then when Jack Benny moved to television, he also went with him. And now we started seeing Mel Blanc appearing in a lot of episodes. So we got to know, as soon as we saw him, we knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to do something funny. Right. And so we had Mel, who he was on the fringe of keeping his face out there. I guess towards the 80s, I remember an American Express commercial where he appeared and says, "You may not know who I am. That's why I carry the American Express card." And then they show a close up and it says Mel Blanc on the card. And he goes, "If I didn't have this, I would have to tell people." And then he did one of the, that's all. He did Porky Pig. And he said, "I would have to do that all the time, but that's why I carry the American Express card." But Paul Frees, he was also, you can see his character, and he does small character roles in a variety of films over the years. Nothing really famous that stands out. Unless you're really into film, then you would be able to pick out where you've seen him. What is interesting about Paul Frees, he was such a gregarious personality. There's no other way to say it other than a personality. A fun guy, always on, and had an ego bigger than Texas. But it was blown out of proportion on purpose with a wink, but yet you weren't sure. You thought it was an act, but maybe it's not. So he was just incredible. He never let that guard down, at least not around anytime I saw him or met him, and anyone that I knew. It was always Paul Frees. It was always on. But anyway, he appeared in all kinds of films and stuff. But his big thing, a lot of people may not know about, other than just real Disney files, is that when you go through the Pirates of the Caribbean, most of the pirates, those animatronic figures, their facial features are based on him. They've changed them they've put a beard on or put a patch on, but the basic structure of the face is Paul Frees.
Wow.
which kind of fills in with that part of that funny ego that he had. They had this big bombastic, these are the working hands of Mr. Goodwrench, and nobody knows your GM car better. He had just this wonderful baritone voice. He used to be, for those people that are listening that are from Los Angeles, so there was a big bus station back in the 70s called KHJ, and he just, you can YouTube it, he's just was one of those voices. He'd say, the rhythm of Southern California. I forget what the number is, 102.4 KHJ. He just an amazing voice. Yeah, man, just really cool. He was one of those early guys that my ears perked up when I heard him. Is I've got to know who that is. And it took me months to figure out, oh, his name is Paul Frees. And then I started recognizing him. He's here. Oh, he's there. Oh, I hear him there. Oh, he's in Mr. Goodwrench commercial. And it became like this treasure, looking for treasure when I was a kid. His voice would pop up in different commercials or television shows. Yeah. So a lot of fun.
It really is. There's so many unsaids that we've missed even amongst this discussion, and we've hit so many.
Oh, yeah.
The guy that does the Allstate commercials.
Oh, without a doubt. Absolutely. Yeah. Very an iconic voice. He's one of those voices that people, they hear it and they know it immediately. As soon as they hear the tones. And Dennis he's an on-camera actor that is known for doing a lot of other things. But in those early 2000s, when he started doing that Allstate as a spokesman, he would appear on screen. But over the years, they just use his voice. And I don't know if he still currently is or not, if he still is, but he really is identified. Just by you saying that, I know exactly you're talking about Dennis Haysbert. It's one of those modern iconic voices that people know, and we're so surrounded by it. For example, Jake Wood is the voice of the gecko for Geico. And if he was walking on the street, probably most people would have no idea who Jake is. Yeah. You know, this British actor, unassuming. But probably in the UK, he's probably more well known, I think. I'm not sure. I just know that he does Geico. Voice. Go ahead.
We touched on the emerging trends in voice acting, like AI and motion capture. Are there any that are really on the precipice that are competition for you folks right now?
Like you said, the celebrity, that's been a thing. I remember going for an audition years ago for being called for Lion King, and finding out that they've also called James Earl Jones for the character. Well, as soon as you find out that, you know, who's going to get the role, you know, me in this room full of unknowns, or is it going to be James? It's James Earl Jones, of course. So, of course, that's a competition of how are you going to compete against celebrity? The answer is
But I'm not talking about the celebrity aspect. I think maybe you misheard my question.
Oh, okay.
Talking about just how voice acting, like artificial intelligence and motion capture, these are technologies that are coming up, and some of them are already out, that can mimic Tom Cruise's voice or create deepfakes with these technologies. And as they get even better, then there'll be tools that we can use to create movies or animation. I know that, for instance, there's a program out there where you can upload audio, and the AI will create an avatar and create emotion behind the text and how the reader is influencing the words that they're using. So they're able to somehow read the emotion from the way it's being read and then construe that through the AI avatar.
Yeah, with motion capture, that is something that a lot of us can offer both. I don't particularly enjoy doing motion capture, but a lot of voice artists do that. So that's something that's working in tandem with a voice artist. They can choose to do that on the side. With AI, that is something that is, as you say, it's not on the horizon, it's already here. And as this podcast is going out, the Screen Actors Guild is getting ready to strike. And one of the reasons they're striking is because of the rights. They don't want the studios to replace human actors in films, television, and commercials. And part of that is regulating AI, because this deep fake thing, it so easily could get out of hand where someone could emulate a politician or someone in power, or let's say they could emulate your mother and influence you that way over the phone or video call or whatever. But from a voice actor's point of view, there's things that we can also use it as help to a lot of my long form narration. Having your own voice cloned can be helpful so that you don't go back and have to reread something completely. You just have the clone do it. You have the AI reread that sentence so that you don't have to go back and re-record.
Do they have that currently?
Yeah, they do have that. It's still wishy-washy. Some of it's good, but it is, when it's good, it's really good.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to pay for it. But the scary thing about that is the company that's cloning your voice, are they going to use that clone now for their own? So now that they have your voice, are they going to use it in turn to sell commercials? Right. So a lot of voice actors are now finding out that their voice has been stolen and is being used on different rosters across the internet. So they're having to sue those individuals and those companies. The way to guard against that in a way is that a lot of us voice actors are looking into cloning our own voice and then licensing it out for, let's say a client does not want to pay my normal rate for me to read live or to direct me for their commercial. They don't have that big of a budget, but they can afford an AI version of me where they have limited use of my voice. Of course, they don't have the full range of emotions and all the stuff that would come with directing a human, but they would have your voice and they could license it for that particular commercial for, let's say, 13 weeks, and it plays in Phoenix. That would allow the person with not such a big budget to use your voice, and they're doing it ethically, and they win, and the voiceover wins. But not everybody's playing fair, so you have a lot of people that are using it in the wrong way. So I see a lot of them out there that are trying to emulate Morgan Freeman's voice. They upload and clone his voice because he has thousands of hours of his voice out there with narrations and audiobooks, and there's plenty of material for source that the AI can learn the voice, and then they're using that to have a Morgan Freeman voice, and he might be doing a car commercial in Decatur, Illinois, and not even know it. And that's wrong. People say he's rich, and it's still his identity. I don't think anybody, and that goes across the board. Let's say this AI technology is being used for, you can say, I want a picture of a diner, but I want it in the style of Norman Rockwell. And there it goes. Yeah. So being inspired, I think, is one thing, but just a total blatant ripoff is horrible. Like you were saying, the deep fakes are they're just amazing, and they're scary. Like the guy that does the deep fake Tom Cruise. That's just
right. Yeah.
I know it's been fun. It's in jest, but it's still scary. It's a reminder of this is what could happen. He could have Tom Cruise say anything at all, and Tom Cruise would have no regulation over it. How far do we own our own identity? It's absolutely fine. Just for you, for example, you have lots of hours uploaded of podcasts with you appearing on camera. So if someone wanted to train an AI, they have that information, they have the data to replicate you as an avatar. And so that's cool. But then if someone were to use that against your will or you unknowingly, that's just wrong. I hope to God we can regulate this.
I feel like it needs to be built on some kind of blockchain technology. The blockchain is the best way for us to store information, but also to find out who to access it, as well as in terms of trying to keep control of an industry rather than having it taken away from you by exactly what we're talking about. That might be the best way to go about doing that, in terms of licensing your avatar that's put on a particular blockchain and used for just the things that we're talking about. I think that would be that way, especially if somebody were to create a successful payment model for the artist, they get XY% of what comes in, you know what I mean? That would be a successful model, perhaps, to conduct something like that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Now, Is there an investor out there? Let's talk.
Let's right. He's got the idea. You've got the money. Let's 2 and 2 is 4.
Yeah, that's right.
No, it has to be regulated. It's to me, it's just as scary as in things or opioids. It needs all these things need to be regulated because it's destroying the infrastructure of our country. And AI, one of the main guys that created AI, he's even warned the public the monster has been unleashed. That
I've seen some of that.
Yeah, it's scary. He's a former Google engineer or whatever.
Yeah.
He's warning the government, you need to get a handle on this because we live in a time now, Beau, where people are selective with they only choose to read the news stories that they agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily reality. That isn't reality.
I think they're limited to so much time in a day. And as prices go up, people have to work more. And it's been like that for a long time now, which you can see within the family structure. Look at what it was like in the 50s or 60s growing up versus what it's like today. Barely one parent's home at the same time for dinner. Usually one's just getting off of work or going to their second job. So it's a dynamic where and I'm getting probably a bandstand, I apologize. It's getting to the point, though, here in America that I feel like the control over us is by depriving us any free time and forcing us to put in as much time for the system as we can. And as a result of that, though, we don't have time to vet the news. We don't have time to find out if what we're being told is true or not. We have to take things at a certain face value. But in this day and age, we don't have any independent news anymore. And we only have these huge conglomerates that really write the narrative. And so it's a scary time that we live in. Off the soapbox.
That's good insight. Yeah, it really is. We're letting other people's opinions shape our own opinions.
That's right.
And if we don't like them, we hit skip, we hit swipe left, whatever it is.
Next, please.
YouTube shorts. We just scroll through until we find, this conspiracy theory is something I can believe in.
And now I feel like we have to break things into smaller chunks for people where, like you said, we have these 15-minute scroll through reels.
It's funny. Joan Gans Cooney, who's one of the creators of Sesame Street, that's how Sesame Street started. Was Joan came home one day and her daughter was singing a jingle for Budweiser, but yet doesn't know her ABCs and didn't know her numbers. And Joan was like, how can it be that my young daughter, whatever she was, 5 or 6, how can she know a beer jingle, but yet not know her ABCs? And so a psychologist friend of hers was saying that this newer generation at that time, Gen, were learning in smaller chunks of time. We were learning in intervals of 30 seconds, like a commercial.
Yeah.
He was saying, he posited, you could also teach them the same thing if you made little short vignettes or commercials so that they learn something with a little bit of a song and little 30-second vignettes. So thus Sesame Street was born. And the days of Abraham Lincoln doing his 8-hour speeches or however long he did, those days are over. It's like people don't have the attention span. And now I'm 53 years old right now. So now we have people, it's like, while they're driving and they're swiping and they're talking on the phone and we're multitasking. And yet a lot of people are still struggling just to put food on the table. News, like you said, that a buddy of mine, he has a kid and he was trying to impress him saying, hey, Connor's Voice is going to be on NBC tonight. Mm-hmm. And the kid's reaction was, what's an NBC? And it made me and my friend were like, what? My God, how can you do? If he had said he's going to be on TikTok or YouTube, or he understood that, but he does not know what NBC. He's even heard of Peacock streaming. He's heard of that, but he has not heard of NBC or ABC or ABC or CBS. That's what I grew up with, those 3 networks, and maybe Fox if you count that, or PBS. But the big 3 it was everything. So good or bad.
What's the future look like?
Yeah, I think it's information, like you say, is so disseminated. There are so many channels, literal channels that you can choose from. and they're in small little groups. There may be 1,000 people here, 2 million people listening there, 10 million over there. There's no longer 50 million people tuning in to watch Who Shot JR on ABC. You don't have, those days are over. Now you still might have 50 million people, but it's now on YouTube, or maybe those people are watching a fishing show that is streaming on Amazon. So I think the future is going to continue to break apart, but the pendulum swings the other way. So I think just as if we went through a period where there's a million companies, there's a company that makes bologna, there's a company that makes Shell Oil, and then all of a sudden they started buying. So you had Procter and Gamble, who owned a lot of stuff, and then Kraft owned a lot of things, and then Heinz, General Electric, they bought NBC, and then Disney owns ESPN. They also own Hulu. They own on and on. So I think that eventually the pendulum will swing the other way.
It's like the one with the most toys wins.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going to happen is then it gets as full as it can, and then the pendulum swings the other way, and it just goes back and forth.
What was that movie with Sylvester Stallone? And he was in the future. I think it had the guy that played Blade. Anyways, Taco Bell was the corporation that won everything. So everything was underneath.
Yeah, what was it? Demolition Man?
Yeah, Demolition Man. That was it.
Yeah.
Great movie.
Right.
Great movie.
Oh, yeah, fantastic movie.
Especially for its time. That's where we're going.
Yeah.
Is it the same way within the industry that you're in? You have these melting pots, and they just gobble up each other until there's just going to be one soup.
Yeah, I think it is going to go that way, and to a point where I think then it's going to go the other way. Right now in the industry, a lot of my students are thinking that when they join voiceover, they have to, or begin voiceover journey, they have to get an agent. That used to be the case. You had to have an agent to succeed, but you don't anymore. A lot of my large clients go directly to me. They don't necessarily go through an agent. Although my agents do bring me some of the bigger work that I do, and that's great. But again, a lot of those clients, I don't want to point them out in particular, but a lot of my larger clients are going directly to me to get the voiceover done. And I think that is going to be the case. So you have these boutique production companies that are popping up. The days of having to go through an agent and a manager and a huge, large advertising agency.
Yeah.
I think it seems like those days are waning a little bit, at least as far as I can tell on voiceover. And now with people with a home studio and microphones, this technology is quite cheap. Now it's breaking apart even more to where everyone can participate, and they can do podcasting, or they can make a film or a commercial or do their marketing type of thing. Yeah. I think it is gone from that conglomerate where, back in my childhood, it was like we were almost studio owned, not quite, but almost. The studio would tell you what you could and couldn't do, and you had to play by those rules if you wanted to work for that studio, which wasn't too far from those days of Judy Garland where they had the studio system. Nowadays, it's Hollywood isn't no longer in Hollywood. Hollywood is in Atlanta. They're also in Oklahoma. They're in Rhode Island. They're everywhere. Yeah. There actually is, I think, one studio left in Hollywood, and that's Paramount Studios. The rest are elsewhere.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. You had the home of MGM. We had all these wonderful things, but it's pretty much Hollywood is just there for the tourists now. It's not really, it's not the film capital of the world anymore.
I think this dynamic of what we're talking about can apply to several different things, but we're seeing a lot of the stuff come to a head where it's finally whittling down to one entity. I find that interesting, and I wonder what the future is going to look like on a broad range of things. So
I know the global scale, I'm not sure. Like I was saying, I think the pendulum is going to swing the other way, but it's like, what will that look like? Because it's gone from multitude of different companies, and like you say, it's coming down to one. There's 5 companies that control pretty much all the media in the United States, much less the world.
That's where podcasting, and there's these additional outlets, because if there's this one person controlling it, people find a way. And so
Yes.
there's still the low hanging fruits that we are.
And that's true. It's like because in any particular podcast in general, whatever they're doing may not appeal to that person right then, maybe that particular episode. But there's a million episodes. Maybe they'll find something with yours. They'll tune into it. They
Right.
will seek out what they're wanting to learn or what they're wanting to hear more of. And so it, in a good way, it is putting the power in the people's hands. So in the old days, if it wasn't on the 3 networks, you didn't hear about it. You had to go to club meetings and hope to God that there was one within driving distance and that they would talk about what you wanted to talk about. Nowadays, it's just a click away to find a meetup or a group or a podcast or a YouTube channel. So in that aspect, I think it's very cool. It's putting the power of the people. On the other end of it, it scares me because then you have local government, local politics. For years, the people that made sure that everything was being done right was your local media, your newspapers, your local television stations. Those are now, most towns, those have been shuttered. They don't have a small town newspaper. And so those people that used to oversee the state government to make sure that those bureaucrats are doing what they're supposed to do, they're not there. So it makes me worry that maybe those people can now do what they want or get away with what they want because nobody's looking. They're too busy playing their video games or watching their favorite YouTube channel, but they're not getting information and being informed about what changes are taking place in your community.
Affected by the lusts of life, right?
Yeah, totally. I had a conversation today with someone. Is a lot of kids today, you have your tablet and your phone or whatever that they're watching their stuff on. And a lot of them, most of them don't watch news at all. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, whatever particular little small town that they're living in, what if there was something catastrophic in a way where the city council all of a sudden says, you know what, the water you're drinking is not safe. There's a boil alert. So make sure you boil your water before you cook or before you do anything. A lot of these people aren't doing that. They don't even, how would they even know?
Right.
Because there's really no alert system unless you're subscribed to like one of the local news stations. And a lot of those are not into that. I don't know.
I feel like in my neighborhood, there's always that neighbor that's acting like Paul Revere, 1 candle, 2 candles. But so there's always like wildfire, someone, God forbid, died. And the next thing, the guy that pumps your gas is hearing about it or telling you about it.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe there's some way to disseminate, get the word out. Or you would hope so. It's
funny how life is, though.
I'm a news junkie. So it's like I always try to stay on top of stuff, even though I really can't. But
and I am too. And
yeah,
go ahead.
I just worry about those that keep their head in the ground. It's like, how do you possibly, and unless it's something like an asteroid is coming to the Earth, that's probably not going to be an alert on your phone. Right.
And if it was, it might not even be an alert on your phone. They might not want mass panic.
That's true. That's true.
It's funny how that stuff works. You'd think, especially with all this alien stuff that you see on the news and the Pentagon's releasing, and now the head Pentagon official came out with the release of that we have alien crafts, and it's true, and we've had them for decades, going back to Roswell, and it's interesting because on YouTube I watch a lot of stuff, and so they had some body experts that went over there, or his testimony and just the way that his interview went, and they thought that perhaps it was some kind of government mass deception type of thing. I don't really know. If we do have technology like they're discussing, it's pretty amazing in terms of advancement. I hope that the U.S. holds it. And if they don't want people to know, maybe that's the U.S. But with all this Louis Alexandro, I think is his name, from ATIP and all of these other people coming out, I feel like there's validity in it. But let me ask you a question. Do you remember back in the day when we were younger and we heard come out of the political system that the next big mass hysteria that the government's going to cause is going to be related to UFOs as a method of control? Do you remember hearing anything like that?
Yeah, I remember. I think, especially as a younger kid, I was very fascinated by aliens and Bigfoot and all that, the mysteries.
Oh yeah.
And it seems like I remember hearing a conversation as I got a little bit older. That's exactly how the government.
It's stuck in my head. I can't give into it 100% because early on there was that seed planted. But I'm a
Right.
big fan of like Skinwalker Ranch and some of these other
Love that show.
shows. Me too. Did you watch the latest episode?
No, I'm catching up. They
Mm.
had a little bit of break, so I can't wait to
Where you
catch up.
where you at?
It's right at the end of season 1 is where I just wrapped up. So I'm a
Oh,
bit
so
behind.
yeah, you got 3 seasons ahead of you.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the fun part about it is they start out, they had some I can't talk today. Anomalies the first couple seasons, and they continue to investigate. But the third season, now this fourth season, have been really amazing. And I don't want a spoiler alert for you, but what they found in their latest couple episodes, do you mind if I tell you, or is it a spoiler?
No, go ahead. Yeah, because I'm going to watch it either way.
It points to like a wormhole temporal anomaly. They have something like a quarter-second delay of space-time that they've measured over the triangle. Yeah, and just they've done some LiDAR stuff that's created images that shouldn't be there, that shows some kind of structure. And yeah, it's super interesting. And the people that are involved, like their head scientist at the ranch is the same guy that was the head of the government research into UFOs. What's his name?
Amazing.
Brandon or something like that.
Something
Anyways,
like, yeah. I'm a big sucker for Coast to Coast. With the early days with Art Bell, and the broadcaster in me loved at the end of the day, I didn't care whether anything that Art Bell said was true or not. It was just his storytelling. I wanted to hear the world is going to end from Art Bell. That's who I would trust to give me that information. But that show, the Ghostwalker, it's just, I grew up in the Southwest and just was filled, especially we were one of the few white families living on the Navajo reservation. And the whole idea, the whole story of Skinwalkers was very apparent. And it was much a part of my childhood because a lot of the natives shared stories about the Skinwalker and where that came from. And so to me, I think there's more validity in that than there are UFOs or the Loch Ness Monster.
What did they teach you? Is it the same as what we see on TV? Or
yeah.
I mean, what is a Skinwalker?
It's pretty much, and this is coming from my memories of as a child.
Yeah.
And who knows the validity of the children telling me. I'm sure we're probably going to get comments that I may be incorrect or whatever, but it was just basically the idea that there are these spirits that they can take any life form. And I do know that one of their big avatars, or I guess you would say, or signs, is an owl, for example, or they could take a coyote, or they're lycanthropous, so that they basically are shift shapers. Is that the right word? And yeah, exactly. Yep. And so that they can go all kinds of places and see all kinds of things. They can travel. Their time continuum is, we don't understand it. So it's within seconds, where they just go from one place and they'll just move 3,000 feet in a heartbeat. So that's what I had always heard. Never had seen one. That being said, when I was in college, I had gone back home for a break, and I had worked at a local department store, like Kmart to be specific. And I worked up at the front desk, and this was in an area just east of the Navajo reservation. So we served a lot of Navajo clients, and they were part of our store. And of course, then I had grown up with the Navajo, so I knew a lot of the background. I'd heard a lot of the stories and their traditions. That being said, there was a lady that had gone in there, and she had a leather pouch, a small little leather pouch that went around her neck that had come loose or whatever, and she left it. Somebody found it and brought it to the service desk. So I had put it up on the thing there for when she would come back, then I could give it back to her. I didn't know who she was, but if someone said I lost such and such, then I would know, okay, that's her. One of our assistant managers came up, and he was, without mincing words, he was a complete idiot. And I'm sorry, but he saw the pouch and he grabbed it, and I went to stop him, and he says, let's open it up and see if there's a ID card or something. And I tried to explain to him that this is a sacred thing to her. It's not that she's not going to have a government issued ID in this thing. It sounded like it belonged to a Navajo woman. That is her pouch. I don't know if she's a medicine woman or whatever, but I've always been taught you don't open that up. You don't know what's in there. And with their traditions and stuff, it's sacred to them. He went in there and he dumped it out, and there was strange things. There was like I think like bones from a bird, small little bones, and there's some leaves and a few grains of gravel type of thing, and some rocks. And
sounds more like a talisman.
Yeah, it was just there wasn't anything of value in there that I could see or anything like that. Just what I would have expected probably would have been in there. Just stuff that meant something to her, not to me or not to anybody else.
Right.
Well, anyway, he said, "Oh, this is junk," and scooped it up and threw the thing on the counter. And I was just like, that's horrible.
It's bad juju.
Exactly. So later on that evening, a little Navajo woman came into the store. She's probably, I don't know, she's in her 80s or 90s, dressed in traditional garb. And she'd come up and in very broken English, explained to me that she had lost her bag, her thing. So I handed it to her and I tried to explain, someone has opened this. I want you to at least know that it was not me. I don't want any lightning hitting me, but has been opened. I'm going to be honest with that. But someone else did it, but it was not me. And I tried to stop them. And there you go. Have a nice day. And he came up about that time and he didn't say anything to her, but as soon as he walked up, Beau, I tell you, I can't even explain it. Her eyes turned bright, like a red color, and glowed. He let out this kind of like weird noise, and I almost fell back. And in a heartbeat, she was gone. And it was the weirdest thing that probably has happened to me in my life. And that probably is the only thing. One of the kids working the checkout, who was Navajo, said that right there was a skinwalker. Wow. And it put the fear of God in me. I'm like, oh my God. So he was saying, whoever the skinwalker really is, that was just using the guise of an old woman. It's not, she herself is not the skinwalker. He was just using that as a vehicle. I was just like, I'm done.
I feel like we should dig into this topic more.
Yeah. I don't know how we got onto it, but I'm glad we did.
We were supposed to give our listeners a sneak peek at our next episode, and I think this might be a great episode to talk about. I think we could talk about paranormal and skinwalkers. And
my gosh, yeah.
That might be fun. Are you down for that?
Yeah, it will be fun. Yeah, the area that you're coming from, talk about some of the unique things that are. Every area has something unique.
Yeah, its own cryptids and stories for sure.
Totally, and same with me growing up in the Four Corners area of New Mexico. It's like a breeding ground of weirdness, and I'm living proof.
You're an alien offspring, aren't you?
Yeah, my studio is my pod. I didn't want to say anything, Beau.
That's why we can't show your true figure. Reptilians aren't quite ready for YouTube.
That's right. Yeah, you
or maybe they are. We do have Skinwalker Ranch. So
we are, exactly. So yeah, I think definitely I would love to come back sometime and talk about it. Absolutely, my friend.
All right, let's do that. Let's sign off. I'm going to remind listeners to subscribe, give a thumbs up, and share this podcast. Connor, you, my friend, are always full of wisdom. I love it. So until our next time together,
can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
This has been Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany, exploring deep stories from real-life guests with real-life experiences, providing insight to our listeners with every story. Stay up to date on future podcasts by bookmarking Digital Voices with BeauTiffany.podbean.com and follow Beau on social media by searching Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. Have an idea for a future story? Send your idea to acrmadison@gmail.com. Until next time, grab life by the horns and keep inspiring others.